Welcome back to another episode of How to Live to 200. I'm T.A. McCann, and I want to thank you for joining us for another conversation about science, technology, human performance, and its effect on longevity. Before we get going, I want to remind you of a few episodes we've done in the past. We had Gil Blander, who talked about performance blood testing and nutrition optimization. We had Alex Zhao, who talked to us about how we can harvest and save our adult stem cells for future use. Or Richard Sprague, who'd done hundreds of samples on his own gut microbiome and what he learned and what we can apply to ourselves. You can find these and other episodes at livingto200.com, and I hope you subscribe. We're just getting going and have tons of guests lined up, but if you have a specific topic area you want us to dig into or a specific guest you want us to speak to, hit us up on the website or on social media, Facebook or Twitter probably being best. Today we have Dr. Myles Spar on our show, which is exciting because he's our first MD. Dr. Spar is board certified in internal medicine. He completed his fellowship in integrative medicine at the University of Arizona under the guidance of the famous and well-known Dr. Andrew Weil, and currently teaches at the UCLA School of Medicine. Dr. Spar practices integrative medicine in his office in West Hollywood, California. In addition, Dr. Spar also directs the integrative medicine program at the Venice Clinic's Health and Wellness Center. This center is one of a kind in the country, serving the less fortunate. Dr. Spar has developed a broad perspective, in part from his humanitarian work both in the field and on the board of directors of Doctors Without Borders. He has a strong commitment to both evidence-based practices as well as coordinated multidisciplinary approach to healing. In 2013, he was presented with the prestigious Bravewell Leadership Award for his work in integrative medicine. And now, this is How to Live to 200. So welcome to the show, Myles. I'm excited to talk to you today about all the things that you're doing down in LA in the integrated medicine category.
Thanks, T. I am too. I'm excited to discuss it all with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, before we get started, maybe you can just give everybody just a little bit of your background and maybe even how we connected.
Sure. Well, I'm an integrative internist. So I'm an internal medicine physician here in Los Angeles in the Beverly Hills, West Hollywood area. And I've done special training in what we call integrative medicine, which really is about precision, prevention, looking at how to optimize health. And it means incorporating not just medications, which unfortunately is what much of medicine is nowadays about, but looking at prevention and especially the use of lifestyle, the use of complementary modalities. So I actually did a fellowship in that through the University of Arizona, and am now co-chair of the board of integrative medicine. Integrative medicine is now a board certified field in the United States, fortunately. And I specialize on men's health. So I really try and work with helping equip men to prevent problems and live optimally using health as the most powerful tool they have to really achieve their goals. I work with celebrities, athletes, all different high-performing individuals here in the Los Angeles area, as well as remotely. And I'm an advisor for the NBA, so I work with NBA players all around the country on how to optimize their health and even stay well, prevent injury, or help recover from injury when those inevitably happen sometimes. And we got connected through Alex Zhao, who is the CEO of Silene Biotech, who some of you that are listening to the podcast may have heard his interview and as a podcast guest with TA a little while back. He's an amazing young guy who started a company that's really the only one I know of that does stem cell banking from peripheral blood. So up until, previously we used to think to get stem cells that are going to be useful, especially down the road for a multitude of conditions, that you had to get it from fat or bone marrow. And his company has really revolutionized an approach to take it just from a regular blood stick, making it much more accessible.
And why did you choose men as an area of focus?
Yeah, and I just found this frustration, especially in the integrative medicine world, with the messaging that didn't seem to resonate with most guys I know and most guys I work with. I felt like I really gravitated toward this approach of prevention and what can you do to stay well and to optimize your health and working with these high performers. But it's not about wellness. It's not about these abstract notions. It's about very concrete what do you want to achieve in your life, and how can you make sure your health is optimized to get you there? But most of the messaging in this non-Western type of approach is more abstract wellness focus that really resonates with women and doesn't resonate as much with guys. And by the way, when I say men, I really mean people who think like a stereotypical guy. So it doesn't have to be an XY chromosome man. It has to be somebody who just responds more to goal-oriented, what do I need to do? Make sure whatever I have to do is pertinent to me and my goals, as opposed to overall wellness, abstract notions of prevention. And so for the most part, those are guys, although certainly a lot of women respond more to that messaging. And for the most part, guys have a harder time skipping a hot dog in the name of potentially not having a problem down the road, as opposed to skipping a hot dog because I've told him that his cholesterol is high and he has plaque in his arteries, and that hot dog is going to contribute to that plaque. So really, I've decided to devote my energies to men's health because I felt like there was a real void in anyone speaking in those very concrete, real terms with this sort of non-Western, more holistic approach.
And I'm with you on the skipping the hot dog. It was 27 years ago that I had a hot dog.
Wow, so there you go.
I've been married for about that long, so I'm totally with you on the hot dog. And I think I've seen the hot dogs being made, so I even skip them.
Yeah, it's kind of scary when you really get into the nitty gritty.
When you think about your clinic and your patients, tell us about sort of a typical intake. What are the tests that you're giving? What are the things that you're measuring? Let's start there.
Sure. So I really do a deep dive because I feel like information is power. There's so much more we know that's actionable that we can assess about an individual's risks separate from another individual's risk. So I really try and start with genetic testing, looking beyond what kind of some of the standard direct-to-consumer test kits do to drill down into what's going on with your exercise that could be optimized based on your genes, with your nutrition, what are you at risk for in terms of detoxification or what's called methylation, which many of your listeners might have heard about, that really pertains to turning on and off good genes and bad genes. And how can that inform what kind of supplements you should be taking, what kind of diet you should be taking? So I start with the genetics. In coupling that with your own personal history and your family history, we can get a really good sense of what further testing is needed after that. Because from that basis, we know, okay, for TA, I've identified, let's just say that you have these issues with detoxification. So now we need to do some tests about supplement levels and liver issues and detox. Somebody else we might identify has high risk for Alzheimer's. We want to drill down into cognitive testing. Somebody else, it might be heart disease risk is identified as an issue. So we want to drill down deeper into that. So I start with that basis of what are you most at risk for, so I can refine what the next level of tests would be, because there's such a broad menu that we can pick from of testing. And I don't want to just do a shotgun approach where we do everything on everybody, because that would cost a fortune and is not really necessary, but it's a little more elegant and refined. So that second step testing depends on A, what you're at risk for based on that first kind of level of genetic testing, and B, what are your goals? What matters to you? What do you want to achieve? And therefore, where do we need to intervene to make sure your goals aren't waylaid?
Let's get into two of those. What are some of the things that you see in your testing for genetics that I might not see in a 23andMe type of result?
Sure. Well, drilling down a lot to things like detoxification, for example, which contributes a lot to aging. So especially relevant to your podcast and the topic of your podcast. If you are not able to clear out all of the, forgive the expression, crap that we're all exposed to, no matter how hard you try and only eat organic and not smoke and, live in as clean a world as possible, you are exposed to toxins, and we all are, and we're exposed to toxins more and more all the time just because of life in the 21st century. So if you don't have the ability to clear that out as efficiently as you should, it's going to build up and contribute to an increased risk for diseases that affect your longevity. So
And that's possible to see in some form of genetic
testing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So some of the more advanced genetic testing can look at everything from the different phases in your liver of detoxification. There's basically phase 1 and phase 2. For example, there's a gene, like one of my favorite genes called quinone reductase, NQO1. Anybody can Google that. It's a really cool gene because it is something that affects this enzyme called quinone reductase. It's really important as kind of an adjunct to the main detox in the liver. So a lot of chemicals require this. And there's I think, I'm not sure the exact percentage, I want to say 10 to 12% of people have homozygous messed up gene in this regard. And a lot more have what's called heterozygous, meaning they have kind of one decent gene and one not good gene, so they probably have half the ability. Well, if you have a real decreased ability for this quinone reductase to work, you're not going to detoxify things, and you're at much higher risk of any environmental toxicity-related cancers or sensitivities or even inflammation that can then lead to heart disease. But we can overcome that with diet, with supplements, with things like taking NRF2 upregulators that you might have heard about. So that's a test that wouldn't be in 23andMe, but it gives me a lot of good information of how I can support you to not have problems that affect your longevity, for example.
And just go a little bit deeper on this sort of category of methylation. Yeah.
So methylation, it's an important process that I don't know who out there remembers their high school chemistry, but basically a methyl group is a carbon and 3 hydrogens. So it's pretty simple, but adding that carbon and 3 hydrogens to molecules completely changes them and activates them. And importantly, in terms of longevity, it turns on enough genes. So, I'm sure many of your listeners are aware of epigenetics and the fact that when I was in med school, all we learned was you had your genes. It was that kind of Mendelian genetics, if you remember, studying the peas and the beans and all of that. And you either had your autosomal dominant recessive gene or you didn't, and you were basically screwed if you had bad genes. And we now know that's really not true, and that even if you are born with bad genes, that is not your fate, that you can turn on and off bad genes through everything from diet to stress management and lifestyle and taking the right nutrients. So a lot of that mechanism through which diet and nutrients and all that affects those genes getting turned on and off is through methylation. It's through affecting what genes get affected by that methyl group. Some people are born deficient in methylating the good genes and in methylating certain things like B vitamins. So one gene, for example, a lot of your listeners might have heard about is MTHFR. Have you had anyone discuss that on the podcast before? Nope. So MTHFR, it doesn't matter what it stands for. It's methylene tetrahydrofolate. But bottom line is a lot of people, that's their first introduction to the methylation gene. They hear, and you can get that, I think, on 23andMe, actually. They hear, I don't methylate my B vitamins, so that means I have high homocysteine. And we know homocysteine is a big risk factor for heart disease. So that's kind of the intro level of genomics for doctors, is to test an MTHFR gene on a patient and say, oh man, you have this. You need to take pre-methylated B vitamins so you don't get this high homocysteine. But we know it's a lot more complicated than that. And so if you can test not just that MTHFR, but other genes that affect methylation, we can know if you need support in getting those good genes turned on and bad genes, for example, genes that contribute to cancer, turned off.
Are you seeing any sort of, if you look across your patient category or patient population, any sort of key trends in this broad area as you do the genetic testing to then say, almost everybody or a significant portion of these people have this issue, which then results in a generally specific kind of remedy?
Good question. I think what I'm seeing is some of the folks that I used to think were all hypersensitive and stressed out actually had reasons to have some of their symptoms. So it was kind of on me to say, whoa, this isn't just somebody who's stressed out, even though they probably are as well, but there's a reason they have some of these symptoms. For example, people that would say, I work in this building, and ever since I started working there, I've had these physical problems, either migraines or some kind of rash, and everybody else that works there is fine. now we can actually test to see, oh, you know why? You have these genes that actually make it so you don't clear out whatever kind of toxins might be a little more prevalent in that building, from a fresh coat of paint to fire retardant chemicals in the carpet or whatever it is. Other people just clear out that stuff. You have a gene where you don't clear that stuff out of your system so well, and that affects your ability to detoxify, and that's why you have those symptoms. So that's one thing I'm finding, is the people that had issues that we kind of were blowing off and saying, well, it's just because you're stressed, do some meditation, which is important. A lot of them also have these other issues, and if we just support their detoxification, some of their symptoms get better.
While we're on that topic, have you found the same thing or experimenting with sort of microbiome? We've started to talk a lot about that on the podcast, and people who may be correlated with a certain sort of, I'd say, emotional or mental state, which is now correlated with something that's just not working properly in their gut.
Yeah, I haven't experimented much with it. I'm just starting to. I was listening to that on your podcast with the guy from that looked at the genome, and he was talking about the different strains and how that can affect mental outlook. I'm just starting to look at that. You know, it's fascinating. It's confusing because it changes. It depends on what day you check the genome. So I'm looking at some of these sites that check stool, and I'm still not sure how to interpret it, because you check it one day, it shows one thing. You check it another day, you show another. We used to think giving probiotics was the answer. Now we know give probiotics for a limited period of time, but as soon as you stop, the genome kind of goes back to how it was. So it's still something I'm trying to learn more and more about.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting where you think that when your comment about genetics to epigenetics, which is you're not cast in stone forever, and then you could even take it one step further to get into microbiome, knowing that you could really affect your state in many different ways on a day by day, hour by hour type of level, and that may be affecting everything from your physical state to your mental state to your emotional state.
Right. Well, that's the future, right? That's what's so exciting. I mean, to me, it's really about using all these tests to see what your potential is. It's not using these tests to see what your Achilles heel is. Do you know what I mean? It's about starting with, what are your goals? What do you want to achieve? And let's find out more about your physiology so we can support you in achieving those goals. And ideally, in the future, it's exactly what you're saying. It's about an ability to, in real time, capture that data. You know, have wearable devices that not only tell us your heart rate variability and your stress level, but tell us your blood sugar and your sodium. I mean, I did an Ironman for when I turned 50 as my kind of, I'll show you 50. And the whole time I kept thinking, I wish I knew my sodium level. Like, I need to know, do I need just water or do I need Gatorade? And why don't I have a watch that is getting not only my heart rate, but also my sodium level, so I know what to, eat at the next pit stop, my glucose level, so I know if I need sugar. And so it's exciting to think about, not only when you're doing a race, but just in general life, that we will, I'm convinced, be able to in real time measure some of those things, maybe even our gut biome. Every time you go to the bathroom, maybe there'll be a toilet that reports out our biome, and what do we need to have some kombucha or kefir, or what exact strain we're missing that could be affecting everything from our mood to our sleep.
So let's go into the elite athlete category for a bit. And what are some of the things that you're seeing there? I mean, a lot of elite athletes are there, I would say, arguably initially from a genetic predisposition. They had a lot of capability, but I'm sure that some of the ones you're working with are doing some experimental things to even enhance that performance. And this could be everything from the on-the-court performance to travel and recovery, which I'm seeing a lot, especially in baseball, and nutrition, time-based nutrition, specifically before, during, after games, a little bit of your Ironman sort of dialogue. So I'm wondering what you're seeing at an NBA level, knowing that they're playing a relatively long season, a stressful sort of game. The more minutes are on the court, the better off they're going to be. And yet the beating that their body is taking over a long season is high. So I'm wondering what you're seeing at that NBA level.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things that have really stood out. One is sleep. So especially in the NBA, they play a ton of games, and oftentimes they're playing a ton of games back to back, and they're traveling, and they actually leave right after the game's over. So they used to stay overnight when they'd play an away game. Now they get on a plane pretty much as soon as the game's over. So that means they don't arrive home till the middle of the night, in a different time zone. So a lot of what comes up is sleep. And so I think the veterans often point out to the rookies that that's the most important thing. And what has been helpful for that are things that sound basic, but that we forget about a lot. So a lot of them point out the whole idea of turning off electronics and not engaging in things that stimulate your brain an hour before bedtime, trying not to do social media and read from screens right before bed. And studies really back up how much that interferes with our ability to get quality sleep. But a lot of the veterans have pointed out that that makes a big difference to them in terms of their feeling rested in the morning, even if they get the same number of hours as they would have after watching a device. They find they're more rested if they haven't been watching a device or engaging in some kind of stimulating type activity. And then the whole idea of trying out different supplements with sleep, especially things like melatonin or supplements that boost what's called GABA, which is a relaxing neurotransmitter, how helpful that can be for sleep. And then the other thing that I found a lot that's been really interesting with especially in the NBA, but in all the professional athletics, is more of a plant-based diet. It's something that we used to think was anathema to a real professional athlete to be fully plant-based. And then we started seeing people like Vince Carter in the NFL and Rich Roll, who's a big ultra triathlete, and other vegan athletes showing that you can be big and strong and a very successful athlete, even if you're only eating plants. And I don't find a lot of 100% vegans, although there are quite a few and they're outspoken in the NBA, but I certainly find many who are talking more and more about getting away from meat and eating more plants. And when you look at their training food, when I go to the courts and see what they're eating, they all have amazing vegetarian options that I don't think they had a few years ago.
Yeah, I've seen that too at the Seahawks camp. We do a little bit of work with them, and to see the food that's there and the vast majority of vegetarian options, even for athletes, which and oftentimes a reasonable portion have a volume and a mass sort of.
Yeah, I think, and it's because they're feeling the difference, and it's funny because it's like a religion. Some of them really proselytize about telling their buddies they got to try at least 1 or 2 days a week without eating meat, that they just feel better. And I think the biggest thing is about injury recovery, because obviously you can train as much as you want. If you get injured, then that's it. The season could be at least partly over or all over. An ankle sprain, for example, is the number one injury in the NBA. So trying to avoid that, obviously, but if you do get an ankle sprain, making sure you recover as quickly as possible, they really feel like a diet that's more anti-inflammatory will help recovery much better than a heavy meat, more pro-inflammatory, more animal fat laden diet.
I knew I was right about it. I knew it. Going back to the sleep a little bit, are some of the athletes or are your patients tracking resting heart rate? So myself, my resting heart rate's around 50 to 52. And I've noticed, so I track it every morning when I wake up, track my sleep and sleep quality, but less about the sleep quality. I've noticed that when my resting heart rate is sort of 57 or above, which either will happen is I didn't sleep well, slept too little, or there's just extra stress in my life. If it's 57 or above for more than 3 days in a row, I almost always get sick. And what's interesting is I can know that, I can see that, and I can usually correct it, bring it back down in the low 50s by at least an 8.5 hour sleep. And my normal sleep is more 6.5, 7 hours a night. And it's been really interesting. I've been tracking this for about 3 years and seeing this correlation. Obviously, it's worse when you travel to time zones, you're in different beds you're not used to, but I can see it directly in my resting heart rate. Does that sound like I've made all that up, or have you seen that also in some of your patients?
Yeah, you're nuts. There's nothing to that. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I've definitely seen that. But, I've seen resting heart rate. Now, when they're athletes who are really elite, their resting heart rate stays in such a narrow zone, it's kind of hard to find much of a difference day to day. So I find a lot of them are using that in combination with heart rate variability. So like there's a Whoop device that I know Major League Baseball uses. There's an Oura Ring. There are different devices that can measure more an overall strain type measurement that looks at resting heart rate, but also looks at heart rate variability. And the two together really give you a sense of how well prepared you are that day for an aggressive workout or not. And that's really exciting because then you don't just have this standard pre-scheduled workout. You can really say, all right, today, whether I didn't sleep well enough because I drank last night or because, I have a baby at home or whatever reason, I can cater my workout so that I don't injure myself. And then when days I am well rested based on both that heart rate and the heart rate variability, then I can really go full speed and really push it. So I definitely am seeing more and more people, not just the athletes, but, high performing individuals using those type of devices and cater their days according to how much strain their body's ready for.
So you're a fan of then the Oura Ring or the Whoop?
I am. Yeah, I like both of them. The Oura Ring, I pre-ordered. I haven't gotten mine yet, but I have some patients that have the older version, and it's really helpful. The newer version is supposed to be even better. That's really mostly a sleep tracker, but there aren't a lot of other great devices for heart rate variability, but we know that's the best measure of stress. And so it's exciting to see something that's that easy to use that can give us a sense of how things are going in terms of cortisol and adrenal and stress and all of that.
While we're on the topic of food, you've written a bit on your blog about fasting, and a topic that comes up a lot. What's your sort of current thought process around that? And there's first the generic advice for different kinds of people before we obviously you want to have some sort of level specific advice. And it's been pretty interesting for the last probably 2 or 3 months. I'm at least doing at least one 24 to 36 hour fast a week. So I usually stop eating on Sunday night and don't eat until Monday or Tuesday. And it's been really interesting, especially for my training. My Monday morning trainings have usually been better than my Wednesday morning trainings.
Interesting. Yeah, I definitely find that it's helpful for a lot of reasons to try and do some sort of caloric restriction. We know that decreasing calories is probably the most proven anti-aging intervention that one can do. The question is how to go about doing that in the best way. And we know long fasting intervals is not very good. If it's more than a day or so, it's kind of straining on the body. It slows metabolism. So the intermittent fasting, I think, is a really beneficial thing to do unless you have diabetes or blood sugar issues, either hypo or hyperglycemia, or taking medications that preclude it. I think the whole idea of narrowing that feeding window to 8 hours or so is really healthy. I've had a lot of people that are doing that. And just like you, they feel better. They're realizing that it's a myth that whole breakfast is the most important meal isn't really true for most people. And there's certainly no science to that. But lately, I'm really intrigued by, Walter Longo's longevity diet. I don't know if you've tried his 5-day fasting mimicking diet.
I'm certainly aware of his work. I haven't tried any of his specific diets yet. I would say I'm in the exploratory, easy to sort of do this experiment, but I haven't gotten really regimented or structured about it. It's kind of on my list for later this year when it starts raining.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, check it out because the science is very legitimate and he's really bright guy and his book is very well done called The Longevity Diet. And he has this 5-day fasting mimicking diet that I've had colleagues convince me to start experimenting with patients because they've had such success with their patients. And sure enough, I've had a few patients do it who have literally sent me thank you emails because it's helped them either feel more focused and clear afterwards, not the first few days of it. They feel kind of miserable, or break through a plateau of weight loss. So again, it's in the early days of me checking it out, but I have a lot of hope that that's a way to help spur someone to doing maybe starting an intermediate kind of approach to the decreasing caloric intake.
We in this room and talking to you and probably most of your patients are extremely fortunate in the way that we live and the way we have access to all of these kinds of tests and food and et cetera. But I know that you've spent a lot of time both with Doctors Without Borders and your work in the Venice Family Clinic. I'd love to hear how you're translating some of the knowledge that you have for, let's say, us very privileged people to some people who may not have quite the advantages or access that we do.
Yeah, thanks for asking that because that's something that I feel really passionate about. I mean, my program, my Tack 180 program that I use all these testing we're talking about in is a great program, but it's definitely something that costs more money than everyone can afford. And I do think there's still a lot you can do without spending a fortune. I mean, number one, this whole idea of honing in on what matters to you and what are your goals, anybody could do that. And the blue zones, have shown that just having a clear sense of what matters to you and your purpose adds 7 years to life expectancy. So just really taking some time to figure out what you want your health for costs nothing, but will motivate anybody to make the changes they kind of know they should be making anyway in terms of diet or doing stress management or exercising. So that's one thing I coach people to do. I still work at a free clinic 1 day a week, and that's something I talk to all my patients there about doing. And then secondly, my whole program is geared around identifying individualized risk for what could get in your way of achieving those goals. And it uses all these tests, but you don't need all those tests to do that. Like I even said before, some of the way I help identify your risk are just talking to you about your own health history or your own family's health history. So we can infer a lot about your genetics and your risk just from those things. So even if you don't do a fancy genetic test, if we know that we draw out a family tree and we know there's a lot of cancer in your family, especially if it's hormonal based, or a lot of Alzheimer's or a lot of heart disease, that gives us a lot of direction of what we can talk about you should be doing in terms of diet, maybe some supplements if you can afford them, what kind of exercise. So really just taking some time to sit with a doctor and saying, I really want to do everything I can to live as long as I can. So I did this map going back to my grandparents of different diseases. Can you look at that with me and tell me what I should be focusing on? And coupling that again with your goals can help. And then I think the whole idea of, some general approaches that work pretty much for everybody, like eating less calories, like eating more plants, going back to the Michael Pollan, eat more, mostly food or eat real food, mostly plants, not too much, very simple, doesn't cost a lot of money. And then if you want to do one thing, 23andMe is only $199 and you can run that through other result algorithms that give you a little more information. So if you do have access to a doctor that can help you with that, that's not a fortune, and that could give you some of this insight that we're talking about.
What are some of the things you're learning at the Venice Clinic that other clinics focus on those types of populations can sort of take away, can apply themselves?
That it's not that complicated to change the focus from putting out fires all the time to a more holistic prevention focus, that patients want that unfortunately patients seen in these kind of settings are used to only having acute issues addressed and expect to be just given prescription medication for everything. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be expensive to spend the same amount of time just talking to somebody about their diet, their exercise, and what their goals are, and then say, let's hold off on this medication for cholesterol. Let's give you a chance to work on that and check it in a few months. They just light up because they don't get that kind of interaction with practitioners, but they're hungry for it. And it needs to be done. And it really is much more respectful for them than just to say, okay, let's just put out the fire now and keep putting off the idea of what are your longer term goals and how do we work together on helping you with stress or sleep or diet.
So Myles, you mentioned earlier about the ability to sort of turn on and off genes to have some sort of benefit. Maybe you could go just a little bit deeper and give us an example of that.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, the whole idea, it's called epigenetics, or really like genetic plasticity, that our genes, one expression is our genes load the gun, but we pull the trigger. So certainly there are some people that have genes that are going to put them at risk for certain problems. Let's say, for example, ApoE, which many of your listeners might have heard about. So ApoE is a gene that affects cholesterol, and it affects actually metabolism of fats in the body. And there are a few different versions of it. The most common one's called ApoE3. But if you have ApoE4, and remember, you get one gene from your mom, one from your dad. So you have two ApoE genes. If both are this ApoE4 gene, you actually have about 12 times the risk of early onset Alzheimer's disease. But what we now know is that isn't deterministic. So you can actually affect how that ApoE gene gets expressed. Even if you have that lousy version, you can attenuate how impactful that lousy version is. You can decrease how active the lousy version is, or actually what you can do is overcome the lousy work of that gene through eating the right kind of foods, which is basically more cruciferous vegetables that help detoxify stuff, healthier fats, avoiding unhealthy fats like trans fats, taking supplements that help with brain health, things like nicotine, which is kind of a new nootropic that there's more and more evidence about, NAD, which I think you've had people talk about on your podcast before. So all of those things, and stress management. So stress is literally toxic to the brain. Cortisol kills brain cells. So if you manage your stress, decrease that sympathetic nervous system production of cortisol, you will decrease the impact of that bad gene and in a way turn it off. So you're decreasing how strongly it's making itself known, and therefore decrease from 12 times risk to maybe a little bit more than a normal risk of Alzheimer's. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah, it's exciting.
And in that category, you mentioned a couple of what I would call experimental treatments, or even very experimental treatments. When you think about that for your audience, your patients, yourself, what are the 2 or 3 pretty out there experimental treatments that you're either investigating, trying, or reading a lot about right now?
Sure. Well, I think nootropics is one of them. I mean, there's so much out there about how much we can do to enhance our cognition, especially as we age and defer any kind of cognitive decline. There's NAD and NAD precursors, which is a molecule that's really important in energy production in the brain. Like I mentioned, nicotine, there's more and more evidence that, yes, it is something that's addictive. So it's, not all good, but there's some evidence that it can help with brain function. Even caffeine is actually a nootropic that helps with brain function. So looking at just all the different nootropics that are out there and trying to determine which ones are best. And I've definitely tried them all and have my own regimen that I do. I think that's one segment that's really exciting. The other is stem cells, like we mentioned before, through the person that introduced us. Stem cells right now are useful for a lot of things, maybe not useful for as many things as is being touted. Like with any new technology, the first thing that comes out is how it cures everything. And I don't know if that's the case, but there's a lot of things that pluripotent stem cells are used for now, and certainly even more that they'll be used for down the road. So I banked my stem cells because I know in 10 years, there are going to be a lot of therapeutic uses, everything from helping with brain function to helping, God forbid I get in a car accident and have some kind of spinal cord injury, have a heart attack. There are already good studies showing stem cells can help create a patch to replace dead heart tissue after a heart attack. I'm having my kids bank their stem cells because I know in their lifetime there will be a use for them. So I think those two, nootropics and stem cells, are probably two of the most exciting. Then the third is kind of what I'm doing with my whole Tack 180 program. It's really taking advantage of newer testing to determine what else I should be doing, or what else the individual I'm working with should be doing to live as long as healthy and expand their health span as long as possible.
Tell us a little bit more about the current Tack 180 and your vision for the near-term future with that product and product offering.
Sure. Well, Tack 180 is a program I developed based on my frustration with how little most patients are taking advantage of modern testing. The annual physical is pretty worthless, and studies have proven that. The regular labs and insurance covers and annual physical really have been shown to do nothing to prevent mortality. And there have been editorials in very reputable journals from JAMA to New England Journal of Medicine about the failure of the annual physical. Yet there are all these tests available that are really helpful in figuring out what could cause you to die earlier than you should die, and what is actionable, what you could then do to prevent that from happening. It's just that insurance doesn't cover them and they're not, being used as much as they should. So that's why I put together a selection of these tests that I feel are most germane to most of the guys I work with. I call it Tack 180 because tacking a sailboat is all about moving back and forth, using the wind as much as you can to get in the direction you want to go in. So again, it's about my whole idea of what do you want to do, and let's make sure health gets you there. Health isn't the goal. Your goal is whatever you are here to do and whatever you want to be doing with your life, and health is there to serve you. So it's about tacking your habits and your lifestyle back and forth, making tweaks and changes to figure out what is most useful to help you achieve your goals. So we do modern testing from imaging to look to see if you have plaque around your heart or in the arteries in your carotids. We look at your vitamin levels, all your micronutrient levels. We look at your hormones like cortisol and free levels of testosterone in your saliva. We look at food sensitivities, all different type of tests that really help inform a plan that I give you that says, here's what you should be eating. Here's what supplements you should be taking. Here's what kind of diet or here's what kind of exercise is best for you based on your genes. And here's what kind of stress management program you should be doing to really help achieve what you want to achieve.
And what are some of the features you might add to that in the next 1 to 2 years period of time?
Well, I've already started adding some more of the imaging. So, I work with Health Nucleus, which is a part of Human Longevity down in La Jolla, and they do a full body MRI. And so that adds a whole nother element, what we call in science jargon, the phenotypic expression. So, right, like your genotype is what is in your genes, what you're at risk for. So even if I check your labs and I say, you know what, you're at risk for having heart disease because your cholesterol is high. Well, I also do, though, a picture of your arteries or in your heart to see, has that cholesterol actually turned into disease? Do you really have plaque? So when I add imaging, I can see not only what your biomarkers tell me, but what biomarkers have translated into actual problems in your body. Because some people might have the same biomarkers as somebody else and not have a disease manifest. So we don't need to worry about those because you happen to have something that helps counter that from causing problems. So the imaging is something exciting to add in because now there's really advanced MRI technology that can help pick up what's pertinent and not just pick up a bunch of things that look a little abnormal but aren't really anything that need to be chased down. And then I think the next level of testing is really about cognitive testing. Again, it's kind of like the imaging. It's looking at actual what's happening. So really getting advanced testing of how's your brain working. Not just are you at risk for Alzheimer's or early cognitive changes, but how can I really ferret out if you're already starting to have some subtle cognitive changes that you might not even notice, and how can we jump on those before they become noticeable and impair your function?
If we're all going to live to be 200, hopefully we're having sex for a long time as well. And I'm interested in your thoughts, what you might be seeing around men's sexual health as they age, and what things you're sort of prescribing or monitoring in that category.
Yeah, okay, big question. So number one, again, part of the reason I focus on men's health is because I think there's been a real lack of understanding that men have not quite menopause, but what we call andropause. They have a decline in their testosterone and their androgenic male hormones over time. And it's kind of been brushed off as well. As you age, that's what happens, when it doesn't really have to happen. And it's certainly, we don't have to live with that. I mean, as you age, you get cataracts, but we have cataract surgery. We don't just say, well, you have cataracts, you're going to go blind. That's it. So why should we say, well, your testosterone goes down and you're not really able to have an erection or able to have much interest in sex? Oh, well, there is something we can do about that. So I think it's an exciting time because that's being recognized more and more, that it's important if a guy presents with low libido or even doesn't report anything about libido, but just has some depression or is sleeping a lot or overeating, that one of the things that could be off contributing to that is a hormone issue, especially in somebody who's over 45 or so. So checking testosterone is important. And nowadays there's more exciting ways of helping normalize testosterone if it's low. It used to be we had injections that a guy does once a week or has to go into the office to get done, which is fine. But for a lot of guys, they don't want to have to stick a needle in their butt every week. And so now there are all sorts of alternative ways of helping normalize a guy's testosterone level and potentially then normalize his sex life, or at least his interest in sex, trying to have a normal sex life, through topical gels, through compounded creams. We even sometimes use a pill called clomiphene, which is kind of an off-label use to help a guy restore more naturally his own testosterone levels. And then if somebody doesn't want to go with the pharmaceuticals, there's a lot more understanding of natural herbs that help not necessarily raise testosterone, but raise libido and raise sexual interest and function. And that's been really exciting to see more and more evidence of the use of things like maca root, which is kind of called Peruvian ginseng, that really helps a lot of guys, even if they're taking, for example, antidepressant medicines that can mess up sex drive or sex function. There have been studies showing that maca root can overcome that side effect of those medications. So I think it's exciting to see more recognition that just because a man's testosterone declines as he ages, it doesn't mean we have to just accept that.
One of our listeners I saw earlier today, he asked me a question. I told him I was going to speak to you, and I said, what question would you like me to ask him? And he said, in his mind, are there sneaky foods? This is the way he put it, which is, are there foods that everyone thinks is really good for them that really aren't or might in fact be bad? Or are there foods that you've really seen are simple to add to your diet that actually have a really big impact in a normalized sort of way?
I think wheat, I got to say, I think people, at least in this country, I have so many patients that they test negative for any kind of celiac or gluten sensitivity, yet they feel better off wheat. And their brain works better off wheat. Their gut works better off wheat. So I would say that would be one thing that we don't quite understand why. Is it because of all the glyphosate that's used in growing wheat? Is it because of the industrialized strains of yeast? What is it? Because a lot of those guys will go to Europe and eat wheat and they're just fine. There's something about American wheat. So I think that's one thing that may be undermining somebody's goals if they don't realize it. And in terms of easy things to add, this kind of comes back actually to epigenetics. Broccoli sprouts are an easy thing to add. They have this huge ability to increase detoxification. They upregulate with something called NRF2, which is in a lot of these nootropics. It's something that helps detoxify. It's kind of a trendy detox pathway to try and upregulate with all these new supplements. And yet broccoli sprouts does that like 60 times more than regular broccoli or anything else. And you can get it as a powder and add it to shakes and smoothies. So I think that's going to be the next kale.
If you meet a fit 20-year-old on the street and you have to give them one piece of advice, not knowing anything specifically about them, 20-year-olds don't necessarily think about all of this category. What kind of advice do you give them? And this is a generic advice before you know them specifically. Other than the
broccoli, yeah, I would say download a meditation app. I think life is stressful. It just is. You can't get rid of the stress, and stress is toxic. And I think, a lot of people realize they need to exercise, they need to eat right. And when you're in your 20s, you can get away with not eating as well and even not sleeping as well, but the stress will really catch up with you. And that's the age that you want to start implementing habits to carry on lifelong. And I think if you spend even 10 minutes a day doing anything that helps manage stress, helps convince your brain that everything's under control, even if it isn't, that is going to give you the longest longevity benefit. And going back to the genes, it'll turn on the genes that are anti-inflammatory.
What about the same question for the 50-year-old?
Exercise, move. I think that's, the biggest problem I see is with my patients. And it's so funny because they want to know what diet to follow and they want to know anything they can do, but they're not willing to exercise enough. That maybe they'll do a little bit, but the older you get, the more you need to exercise. And that's been shown not just for physical health, but for brain health. Physical activity is absolutely linked with cognitive decline. So I think moving at least an hour 4 days a week and getting your heart rate up there, getting sweaty, doing interval training ideally where you're really pushing it for 30 seconds and then backing off for a couple minutes. I think that's the biggest thing.
I'm on the board of this very cool company here in Seattle called Volt Athletics, and we do personalized sports-specific strength training. And the majority of our customers are athletes or college or high school athletic teams. But we're just now starting to experiment with using that product for all of us who are sort of older or outside of our performance category. And we call it fit over 50 as a product offer. And it's very much focused on strength training, weight training, but focused on what's the difference when you're 50 or even 60 or 70. And how do you both understand the sort of broad strength deficiency or areas where you need to improve, but also increasing and adding not only that interview training or aerobic training, but also strength training. I'm wondering your perspective.
Yeah, well, I think, with my older guys, there are 4 realms of training I really push to try to include every week. So it's definitely the cardio, like I talked about, sweating. Definitely strength at least once a week. It's important to keep muscle mass. The more muscle mass, the more testosterone. The more testosterone, the better you feel. As well as for bone health, it's really important to do resistance training. But the other 2 is flexibility and core. A lot of what I hear about is back pain. And if somebody does some core ab workout, some kind of Pilates, any kind of thing like that, that's going to prevent a lot of that back pain. And then flexibility. And it's about functional flexibility. That's how you're going to prevent falls. You're going to prevent pulling things and straining things. So I really push having some aspect. And there's certain exercises that do more than one thing. So yoga will hit a little bit of resistance with body weight resistance and a lot of flexibility. And doing some kind of, hill running will incorporate a lot of the cardio as well as a little bit of resistance type work. So you can find things that do more than one. But yeah, all 4 of those I think are important as you get over 50.
If you could try any therapy that you know of that you haven't tried yet, what would it be?
Well, I want to do that thing that the guy at Bulletproof Labs has, that machine. I forget what he called it, where you just get in there for 20 minutes and it's like a 2-hour workout. I don't know if you remember the name of that. You had him on your podcast. I haven't. I gotta do that. I know it's stupid because it's in the LA area, but Santa Monica's may as well be in Seattle compared to where I am. But but I gotta get over there.
Awesome. Well, it's been great to have you on the podcast today, and look forward to hopefully meeting you in person at some point and trying some of these.
You too.
Together.
I can't wait. I hope so.
You've been listening to another episode of How to Live to 200. Thank you so much for joining me and exploring this world together. I get a ton of help from the L200 crew that includes Lauren Krayinsky and Kevin Kirkpatrick. The theme music is composed by Emmett McCann. Yes, that's my nephew. You can learn more about this and other episodes at our website, livingto200.com, or find us on Twitter or Instagram at howtolivето200, where we post lots of photos of cool things. It's early days for this podcast, so we would appreciate any and all comments or telling a friend or 2 about what we're doing over here. It might be irresponsible for you to keep it a secret. Until next time, eat right, get lots of sleep, keep good numbers, and be looking around the corner for the next big breakthrough. If we're going to live a long time, we better do it well.